Hi and welcome to episode 7 of Holistic Stroke Solutions, where we go beyond conventional training protocols and look and dive into the loose ends and missing links in stroke rehabilitation. My name is Dr. Arjan Kuipers. I'm a clinician, neuroscientist and publish on stroke rehabilitation. I do this together with Linda Radestad, who had a severe stroke herself, is now an author and an inventor, makes tools for stroke survivors like you. Linda will appear in one of the upcoming episodes. She just published her second book and is very busy handling those affairs. And I can promise you the contents of this book fit right into this episode. In this episode we are going to go into episode 2 of why foundational training is superior to regular stroke rehabilitation, where we just look at the end result. In the previous episode we talked about the orchestra that you are building, the orchestra where all the parts of your central nervous system work together to produce beautiful speech, hand manipulation, arm swing, walking straight, and we do this by looking at how the central nervous system regressed back after your stroke. And in the first episode we talked about the evolution of movement, where we built the central nerves from the bottom up, starting by being on the back, having a set of primitive reflexes which evolved into more and more complex movements. In this episode we're going to put the microscope on all the different parts of your central nervous system and how we can make use, and I'm going to prove to you why we should go back to foundation to get superior results in our training efforts after a stroke. That's the whole purpose of this episode, is to show you what is possible and why it is possible. In the first episode I made you aware that we have to make sure that all the parts are online again, reconnect and synchronize, and without it we don't get the beautiful masterpiece that we want to hear from the orchestra. Hence the beautiful masterpiece that is you, that is your brain and central nervous system. There are a lot of missing parts in stroke rehabilitation. Most therapists will not tell you, and that's why I'm going to tell you, that there are many things we can do to get the whole orchestra online. What do I mean with that? Even though you regressed back into a more primitive state of your central nervous system, where parts become disconnected and desynchronized, there are many parts that are still intact. For the majority of you who had a stroke, usually that's a middle cerebral artery stroke, but also for you, those of you who had a cerebellar stroke or had a posterior stroke or a more anterior stroke where the frontal lobe is affected, this applies. What do I mean with that? We have a spinal cord, that's where all the nerves that connect your limbs to the central nervous system come through. That's where organs get their nerve supply from. And the spinal cord hangs under your brainstem. Your brainstem is of course encased by your cranium, your skull. So it gets the protection it deserves. Now the spinal cord, the brainstem, the cerebellum that is attached to the middle parts of the brainstem, and the hemispheres on top of that and the deeper parts of your brain, they all have mechanisms that are still intact after your stroke. And we can make use of them. Think about what I shared with you in the previous episode. We talked about crawling. You go from very random movements that are already built in. Well, we have a lot of patterns of movement already built in that is genetically determined. We have so-called central pattern generators in your spinal cord that make sure that you can move your limbs in synchrony, which you need for crawling. And we can make use of those. So we can activate the affected parts and the non-affected part, meaning we can combine left and right movements by going through crawling patterns, swimming patterns. We can look at arm swing, for example. We can look at crossing the midline. We can still make use of these inbuilt spinal cord reflexes. One of them are the central pattern generators. We also have a right and left part that, for example, steer the hands or the arm muscles. When we use arm muscles on one side, we send a very strong inhibitory signal to the other side. So when we want to move the arm forward on one side, we want the arm back on the other side. That is reciprocal inhibition. Those patterns are built in. We have patterns from the arms to the legs that are built in. So you start to see that we can make use of this even though the ultimate initiator of movement may be damaged. So we can use automated crawling movement on the back first, on the side, on the front. Can use movements in the water, for example, to activate these reflexes that are still there. But that's not all. We have a brainstem. Your brainstem is vital. Without it, you won't survive. You will not be able to activate the higher brain centers. In the brainstem, we have pattern generators that assist you in walking and crawling. And the beauty is when we go through the system, when we start random movement with the primitive reflexes that are built into your spinal cord and into your brainstem, we start to provide information, and with that information from these movements, we build more and more complex movements. So complex movements built on primitive, less refined movement. There's a hierarchy in movement which has regressed after your stroke. And we have to look where in the system have you regressed to that makes that you are spastic, you lost control over movement, you cannot use an arm or a leg, and then think, okay, what is still intact? Is that the brainstem where we have automated, for example, muscle tone up and down regulation when we walk or crawl, or do automated reciprocal motions like cycling motions with our arms and hands? And can we make use of that? Can we make use of the cerebellum, which is like attached on the back of your brain under the two bigger hemispheres which are connected with the corpus callosum? So, and the cerebellum is dependent on movement information. So one of the ways we built the cerebellum, which is the ultimate integrator, it predicts before you move, talking together with the primary centers that give the command, if the movement is going to succeed, how likely it is that you're going to succeed. And while you are moving, and it constantly adapts and upgrades based on the input it gets to refine movement. Cerebellum in most people is still intact after a stroke, so we can make use of stimulation of the shoulders and the hips to really have a big impact on the cerebellum. We can introduce more complex movements to stimulate the cerebellum. Then the feedback from your body, we talked about this in previous episodes, is vital. So the proprioception, the movement information from your body, is the biggest input you have. With this biggest input, we also build and we transform our thalamus. That's our relay station for sensory information. And this sensory information is needed to provide your primary movement centers with information. So you see, we build complexity in our movements. We go through the different layers, but we have to start at the bottom, on our back, stabilizing shoulders. We have to stabilize our posture, our core muscles. We have to make use of these pattern generators and these pattern movement generators that we have in the brainstem, in the lower parts and in the higher parts, to up and down regulate movement. Then we can start to build complexity. But you see, we need both sides to do this, because both sides make sure that at the hemisphere level, not just because of the feedback you're getting, but also because the movement on both sides will make sure that these start to talk again. One of the biggest, and this is the bigger, one of the biggest reasons why you don't function so well after a stroke is that the lesioned part, the parts where you had the stroke, they become inhibited. You hear me right? So they not just lose function, but a big part of what's happening is that the good parts of your brain, meaning the opposite hemisphere, is taking over tasks, and it will suppress the lesion part even further, making sure that when you want to execute arm movement or leg movement on the opposite side, it is not as sophisticated as it can be. But by using both sides of your body with the crawling, with the movement patterns that we have inbuilt, like walking movements, arm swing, which is an awesome predictor of how your nervous system is doing, but that's for another episode, we can make sure that we disinhibit the affected part. So we have to make use of both sides. That is not just focusing on the arm or the hand in stroke rehabilitation. And I cannot repeat this enough. That is important that you focus on that as quickly as possible with high repetition. But think about the orchestra. If you just focus on the trombone in the orchestra, you will have a not so good sounding masterpiece at the end. We have to integrate the hand with the rest of your central nervous system, all the different layers that we talked about in this episode. And in that, having said that, now we're ready to go into the specific movements that you can use to accomplish this and to get more sophisticated stroke training, post-stroke training, and better end results that look more normal, more connected, more synchronized. And that is what we are going to discuss in the next episode. Which particular exercise in which sequence are you going to use to get better stroke rehabilitation results? I will see you in the next episode. If you have not already done so, please subscribe to our channel so you get regular updates. See you in the third part of this rehabilitation series.